Story 1. Crimes Rails the disappearances on holiday trains. As I stepped onto the holiday train, a sense of unease crept over me. The platform was bustling with excited travelers, but there was something off about the atmosphere. It was as if a shadow loomed over the festivities, a foreboding presence that whispered of danger. I found a seat by the window and settled in, watching the scenery pass by in a blur of lights and colors. The train was packed with people, all chatting and laughing, seemingly oblivious to the silent threat that lingered in the air. As the journey progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of shadowy figures moving in the corners of my vision, only to disappear when I turned to look. It was unnerving, to say the least. Suddenly, a commotion broke out in the carriage ahead. I strained to see what was happening, my heart pounding in my chest. People were shouting, panic spreading like wildfire. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The carriage fell silent, the only sound the rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that someone was missing. A young woman, who had been sitting just a few rows ahead of me, had vanished into thin air. There was no sign of struggle, no trace left behind. It was as if she had never been there at all. Whispers of foul play circulated among the passengers, fear and suspicion hanging heavy in the air. The train staff tried to reassure us, but their words fell on deaf ears. We were all too aware of the danger that lurked in our midst. As the hours passed, more and more people disappeared. Each time, it was the same story. One moment they were there, and the next, they were gone without a trace. The sense of dread on board the train was palpable, a living, breathing entity that coiled around us like a serpent. I knew then that I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. I delved into the history of the holiday train, uncovering a string of disappearances that stretched back decades. Each incident bore the same eerie similarities: people vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only fear and unanswered questions. And then, as the train hurtled through the night, I made a chilling discovery. The disappearances were not random acts of fate. They were orchestrated, planned with meticulous precision by a malevolent force that thrived on chaos and despair. In a final, tragic twist of fate, I realized that I was next. The shadows closed in around me, their icy fingers reaching out to claim me as their own. And as the train thundered on towards its unknown destination, I knew that I would never be seen again. Anonymous Spectator Story. Story 2. Dark Night on Trans-Siberian 3 Vanishing Acts. As I stepped onto the Trans-Siberian train, a shiver ran down my spine. The air inside the carriage felt heavy, suffocating, as if it carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. I found my seat by the window, hoping the passing scenery would distract me from the growing sense of unease that had settled in my chest. The train began its journey through the vast Russian landscape, the rhythmic sound of the wheels on the tracks providing a hypnotic backdrop to my thoughts. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the world outside, a feeling of dread crept over me. I tried to focus on my book, but my eyes kept drifting to the other passengers in the carriage. They all seemed to be staring at me, their gazes cold and unrelenting. Whispers floated through the air, too soft to make out words, but laden with malice. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my spine as I realized that no one else on the train seemed to be moving. They were all frozen in place, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a chill through my bones. I tried to shake off the feeling of paranoia that gripped me, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But then, one by one, the passengers began to vanish. It was as if they were being erased from existence right before my eyes, leaving behind only empty seats and a lingering sense of dread. I clutched my book tightly, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized I was alone in the carriage. The only sound was the relentless clacking of the wheels on the tracks, a haunting reminder of my isolation. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing at the end of the carriage. It was a man, his features obscured by the shadows, but his presence filled the space with a palpable sense of menace. I tried to look away, to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But when I glanced back, he was closer, his eyes boring into mine with a malevolence that made my blood run cold. I knew then that I was not alone on the train. There was something else with me, something dark and sinister that defied explanation. And as the figure reached out a hand towards me, a bitter realization washed over me. I was the next to vanish, to become another ghostly presence on the Trans-Siberian train, lost to the world without a trace. And as the darkness consumed me, I knew that my fate was sealed in the shadows of that endless night. Anonymous Spectator Story. Story 3. Escape from a Real Hell Train Vanishings in Europe. I never imagined that a simple holiday train ride could turn into a nightmare beyond comprehension. It all started when I stepped onto the old, decrepit train in Eastern Europe. The moment I set foot inside, a sense of unease washed over me, as if the very air was thick with malevolence. The train was nearly empty, save for a few other passengers scattered throughout the dimly lit carriages. The windows were fogged up, making it impossible to see outside. The only sound was the rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks, a haunting melody that seemed to echo through the empty corridors. As the train lurched forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried to strike up a conversation with the other passengers, but they all seemed distant, their eyes glazed over with a look of resignation. Hours passed, and the train showed no signs of stopping. Panic began to rise within me as I realized that we were heading towards an unknown destination at breakneck speed. I made my way through the carriages, searching for answers, but all I found were locked doors and empty compartments. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the train plunged into darkness. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into pitch blackness. I could hear the muffled screams of the other passengers, a chorus of terror that sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the carriage, its features obscured by shadows. A cold dread washed over me as I realized that we were not alone on this train. I tried to run, but the figure was faster. It moved towards me with an unnatural grace, its movements jerky and disjointed. I could hear its ragged breath, feel its icy touch closing in on me. Just as all hope seemed lost, the train screeched to a sudden halt. The doors flew open, revealing the pale light of dawn filtering through the mist. Without looking back, I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, away from that accursed train and whatever horrors lurked within. As I stumbled out onto the empty platform, gasping for breath, I knew one thing for certain. I had escaped from a real hell train, a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my days. Anonymous Spectator Story.